The dust kicked up in spirals around her boots as she stepped into the corral where the stallion had already injured 2 ranch hands that morning. And Owen Crawford watched from the fence post knowing he should stop her, but finding himself paralyzed by the strange confidence in her movements. The black Mustang reared up, his hooves slashing at the air, foam flecking from his mouth as he screamed his fury at being trapped. Owen had seen horses like this before during his 26 years working ranches across the Western Territories. They broke them with ropes and hard hands, with patience measured in weeks and bruises that painted a man's ribs purple. But this woman, this stranger who had arrived in St. George, Utah just 3 days prior on the afternoon stage, she walked toward that 1,000 pounds of wild rage like she was approaching a skittish child. "Madam, you need to get out of there right now," Owen called, his hand gripping the weathered fence rail so hard a splinter drove into his palm. He barely felt it. She did not turn around. Her dark hair hung in a thick braid down her back, and she wore a simple cotton dress the color of creek water, dusty at the hem from the Utah desert that surrounded them. It was April of 1883, and the spring sun beat down mercilessly even this early in the morning. The woman raised one hand, not toward the horse but slightly to her side, and she began to make a sound. Owen had grown up around horses. His father had been a horse trader, his grandfather before that. He knew every trick, every method, every old wives' tale about breaking a wild Mustang to saddle. But he had never heard anything like the sound this woman made. It was not quite a whistle, not quite a hum. It seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest, a rhythmic pulse of breath and tone that barely qualified as noise at all. The stallion's ears flicked forward. His front hooves hit the ground and stayed there. "Easy now," the woman said, her voice carrying across the corral despite being barely louder than a whisper. "Nobody here wants to hurt you. Nobody here is your enemy." She took another step. The horse took a step back but did not rear. His dark eyes, which had been rolling white with panic moments before, fixed on her. She made that sound again, that strange, almost whistle, and Owen realized his own breathing had synchronized with its rhythm. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The sun climbed higher, and the small crowd that had gathered around the corral grew larger. Ranch hands from the neighboring properties drifted over, drawn by the impossible scene unfolding in the dust. The woman moved in a slow spiral, never approaching the horse directly, always giving him space to retreat. Her whispers continued, sometimes in English, sometimes in what Owen thought might be Spanish, and sometimes in no language at all. When her hand finally touched the stallion's neck, a collective exhale went through the crowd. The horse trembled but did not bolt. His head lowered, and the woman pressed her forehead against his jaw, still whispering, still making that strange rhythmic sound. "I have never seen anything like you before," Owen said when she finally emerged from the corral 30 minutes later, the stallion following her like a loyal dog. She looked at him for the first time, and he felt something in his chest shift like a breaking dam. Her eyes were the color of honey held up to lamplight, gold and brown and impossibly warm. Dirt streaked her cheek, and sweat had dampened the hair at her temples, but she smiled with a tiredness that spoke of deep satisfaction. "Most people have not," she said simply. "My name is Harper Zimmerman." Owen Crawford. He removed his hat, suddenly aware of his own disheveled appearance, the blood on his shirt from helping haul the last injured ranch hand to the doctor. That horse put Charlie Stevens in bed for a week, and that was before he got truly riled up. How did you do that? Harper glanced back at the stallion, who stood calmly in the center of the corral, his sides still heaving but his eyes clear and calm. I listened to what he was saying. He was afraid. Everything about how you all were approaching him said predator, said danger, said pain. So I showed him something different. Where did you learn that, my grandmother? Harper's expression shifted, something sad moving behind her eyes. She was Paiute. She could gentle any horse, no matter how wild. She said they taught her as a child that horses were sacred, that they remembered the old world before men came with their saddles and their whips. She taught me to remember that too. Owen's father had taught him that Indians were dangerous, that their ways were heathen and strange. But his father had also died bitter and alone, eaten up by his own anger and whiskey. Owen had learned to question what the old man had said, had seen enough of the world to know that wisdom came from unexpected places. "You are staying in St. George?" he asked. "I was passing through," Harper said, "but I need work. I saw the commotion at the corral this morning and thought perhaps I could be of use. The foreman left 2 weeks ago. Position is still open at the Crawford Ranch." The words came out before Owen had fully thought them through. His brother Thomas officially owned the ranch after their father's death, but Thomas spent most of his time in Salt Lake City, dealing with business ventures. The day-to-day running of the operation fell to Owen. "We have got 12 horses that need breaking before the summer contracts come due. If you can do with them what you just did with that black devil, I will pay you fair wages and provide room and board." Harper studied him with those golden eyes, and Owen had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed the same way she had assessed the stallion, looking for threat or safety, for honest intentions or hidden dangers. "Fair wages means the same as you would pay a man for the work," she said finally. "Done. And I want it known that the horses are not broken. That word, it implies damage. I gentle them. I teach them partnership. They are not slaves when I am done, they are companions." Owen thought about the contracts waiting, about the ranchers and the army suppliers who expected horses that would obey without question, that would carry riders through gunfire and across hostile territory without balking. But he thought, too, about the way that Stallion had looked at Harper, the trust that had somehow bloomed in mere minutes between woman and beast. "All right," he said. "You gentle them, but they need to be ready for riders by July." She extended her hand, and when he shook it, her palm was rough with calluses, but her grip was strong and sure. "You have got yourself a horse gentler, Mr. Crawford." The Crawford Ranch sat on 300 acres of red rock and sparse grassland northeast of St. George, where the Virgin River cut through the desert and created narrow green corridors of life. The main house was adobe and wood, expanded over 2 generations from a simple cabin to a sprawling structure that housed the family and the ranch hands. The bunkhouse stood 50 yards east, and the barns and corrals spread out like a small village dedicated entirely to horses. Owen showed Harper to a small cabin that sat apart from the main buildings. It had been his mother's sewing room before she passed, a place where she escaped the chaos of running a household full of men. After her death, it had stood mostly empty except for storage. "It is not much," Owen said, pushing open the door to reveal a single room with a narrow bed, a potbelly stove, a table and 2 chairs. Dust motes swirled in the afternoon light streaming through the single window. "But it is private and the roof does not leak. It is perfect." Harper set down her single carpetbag, everything she seemed to own in the world compressed into one worn piece of luggage. "Thank you. Meals are at sunrise, noon, and sunset in the main house. We are not formal, but we are punctual. Cookie gets irritable if people show up late." Owen lingered in the doorway, feeling awkward and uncertain. "Tomorrow morning I will introduce you to the horses. Most of them are Mustangs from the Bureau of Land Management roundups. A few are from failed ranches selling off stock. None of them trust humans much. Then they have good instincts. Harper's voice held no humor, just a flat statement of fact. Humans have given them little reason for trust. Owen thought about the whips he had seen used on horses, the cruel bits that tore at their mouths, the spurs that gouged their sides. He had used such methods himself in his younger years, before he started questioning the way things had always been done. "Maybe you can teach them something different," he said quietly. "And maybe you can teach us too." That first week, Owen found reasons to be near the corrals whenever Harper worked. She started with the youngest horses, the ones whose spirits had not yet been fully hardened by fear and rough treatment. She would enter a corral at dawn when the desert air still held a hint of coolness, and she would simply sit for hours. The first time Owen saw it, he thought she had fallen asleep. But when he drew closer, he could see her eyes were open, tracking the horse's movements around the enclosure. She made no sound, took no action, just sat in the dust and waited. By afternoon, the young bay mare she was working with had approached close enough to smell her hair. By evening, the horse was resting its chin on Harper's shoulder. "You are wasting time," complained Frank Morrison, one of the senior ranch hands who had been with the Crawford family for 15 years. "Just rope them and saddle them and be done with it. That is how we have always done it." But Thomas Crawford, on one of his rare visits from Salt Lake City, watched Harper work and overruled Frank's complaints. "She is getting results," Thomas said, his calculating merchant's mind clearly pleased by the efficiency. "And the horses are not getting injured, which means their value stays high. Let her work her way." Owen caught the flash of irritation in Harper's eyes at being discussed like she was not standing right there, but she held her tongue. She was learning, he realized, to pick her battles in a world that constantly challenged her right to exist in spaces traditionally reserved for men. On the 8th day, Owen brought her a particularly difficult case. The roan gelding had belonged to a rancher north of town who beat his animals. The horse had scars across his flanks, and he would attack any man who came near him with a rope. "He killed his last owner," Owen admitted as Harper studied the horse from outside the corral. "Threw him into a fence post, broke the man's neck. The widow wanted him shot, but I bought him instead. I do not know why. Maybe I am a fool." "You recognized something in him," Harper said. "You saw past the anger to the pain underneath." She did not enter the corral that day. Instead, she dragged a chair close to the fence and sat outside, talking in her low voice, making those strange whistling sounds that seemed to bypass human language entirely and speak directly to something more primal. The roan ignored her, but he did not charge the fence either. 3 days passed. Then 5. Owen watched Harper's patience with something like awe. She never showed frustration, never pushed faster than the horse was ready to accept. On the 6th day, she entered the corral and the roan did not attack. On the 10th day, she touched him. On the 14th day, she led him out of the corral on nothing but a loose rope, and the horse followed her across the ranch yard like they had been partners for years. "I have never seen anything like you before," Owen said again that evening as they stood watching the sunset paint the red rocks even redder. He had started saying it often, unable to help himself, each time discovering some new impossible thing about her. Harper glanced at him, something shifting in her expression. "You said that already, Mr. Crawford. Call me Owen, and I mean it more each time I say it." He took a breath, feeling like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. "Where did you come from, Harper Zimmerman? What brings a woman like you to St. George with nothing but a carpetbag and skills that seem half magic?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of long-held grief. "My grandmother died last winter." She raised me after my mother passed from fever when I was 7. My father was a trapper, white, from Pennsylvania. He left when I was a baby. The Paiute band my grandmother belonged to was moved to a reservation 3 years ago. She went, but her heart broke with it. She taught me everything she knew before she died, made me promise I would not let the old ways disappear completely. And your grandmother's people, can you not go back to them? Harper's laugh was bitter. I am caught between worlds, Owen. Too white for the reservation, too Indian for white society. My grandmother's people love me, but they have barely enough for themselves. And the white towns look at me and see something dangerous, something that does not fit in their neat categories. She turned to face him fully, her chin lifted in defiance. So I go where I can, I work when I can find it, and I try to do some good with the skills I have. That is all. Owen wanted to say that she could stay here, that she had a place at the Crawford Ranch for as long as she wanted it. But the words stuck in his throat, too heavy with implications he was not sure he had the right to voice. They had known each other for 2 weeks. He had no claim on her future, but he wanted to. That was the truth that had been growing in him since the moment he saw her walk into that corral. The truth that made him find excuses to be near her, to hear her voice, to watch the way the sunset caught in her hair and turned it to dark fire. He was falling in love with her. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it settled into his chest with a rightness that felt like coming home. Summer arrived in full force, turning the Utah desert into a furnace. Harper worked in the early mornings and late evenings, avoiding the brutal midday heat. Owen adjusted the ranch schedule to match hers, telling himself it was just good management, but knowing it was really because those were the hours he could be near her. They fell into patterns. She would gentle the horses, and he would be the first to ride them, his greater weight and size making him the best test of whether they were truly ready for any rider. The horses Harper worked with responded differently than any he had ridden before. They were willing, not cowed. They moved with him rather than beneath him. It was partnership, exactly as she had promised. One evening in late June, a commotion broke out near the main barn. Owen ran from the house to find 2 of the ranch hands restraining a third man, a stranger with wild eyes and whiskey on his breath. "She is a witch," the stranger was shouting, pointing at Harper, who stood frozen near the water trough. "I seen her whispering at them horses, making sounds that are not natural. She is trafficking with the devil. You are drunk," Owen said coldly, stepping between the man and Harper. "And you are trespassing. Get off my land." "Your land is cursed, Crawford. That woman, she is not right. Everyone knows her kind got strange powers, Indian magic and such. She will bring ruin on you all." Owen's fist connected with the man's jaw before he consciously decided to throw the punch. The stranger went down hard, and Owen stood over him, his knuckles throbbing. "Get him out of here," Owen told the ranch hands. "If I see him near this property again, I will do worse than give him a sore jaw." After the man had been hauled away to cool off in the St. George jail for public drunkenness, Owen found Harper in her cabin. She stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the darkening desert. "Are you all right?" he asked from the doorway. "I am used to it." Her voice was flat. "The accusations, the suspicion. My grandmother faced it constantly. They called her a witch too, said she consorted with demons. Some of the other children threw rocks at me when I was young, called me half-breed and worse things." Owen stepped into the cabin, pulled by the pain in her voice. "It is ignorance talking. Fear of what they do not understand. That does not make the rocks hurt less." She turned to face him, and in the lamplight he could see the glisten of tears she refused to let fall. "I should leave. I am bringing trouble to your ranch. Do not you dare." The words came out more forcefully than he intended. Do not let some drunk fool chase you away from a place you have earned the right to be. Have I earned it? Or am I just another oddity, something interesting for people to watch until they get bored or frightened? Owen crossed the small space between them in 2 strides. He caught her hand, felt her fingers tremble in his grip. You are the most remarkable person I have ever met. You have a gift that borders on miraculous, and you use it with kindness and patience. You have worked harder in these past months than any hand on this ranch, and I. He stopped, swallowed hard, and I would be devastated if you left. Harper looked up at him, her golden eyes searching his face. Why? Because I am in love with you. The confession tumbled out, graceless but honest. I think I have been since that first morning, watching you gentle that black stallion. I know I have got no right to say it, no right to ask you for anything when you are just trying to make your way in the world. But I cannot let you believe for 1 second that you are anything less than extraordinary. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, slowly, a smile broke across her face like sunrise over the desert. Owen Crawford, she said softly, you really have no idea, do you? No idea about what? Why I stayed when I could have moved on a dozen times by now. Why I have been terrified every time some rancher comes by looking at the horses, afraid you might sell them all and have no more need of me. She lifted her free hand to his cheek, her calloused palm rough against his skin. I love you too. I have been trying not to, telling myself it is foolish, that this is just another temporary stop, but I cannot help it. He kissed her then, unable to resist the pull any longer. She tasted like dust and desert sage and something sweet he could not name. Her arms came around his neck and he pulled her close, feeling the solid reality of her against him after months of wanting and wondering. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not as an employee, stay as my partner. Marry me, Harper. Help me build something here, a ranch where horses are treated with respect, where your grandmother's wisdom can live on. People will talk, she said, but there was hope in her voice now instead of resignation. Let them. I stopped caring what small-minded people think about the time my father drank himself to death, and I realized I did not want to end up like him, angry at the whole world. He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are here. I want to watch you work your magic with horses and maybe someday with our own children, if you will have me. Yes, she was laughing now, the tears finally falling but from joy instead of pain. Yes, Owen Crawford, I will marry you. They were wed in September, when the worst of the summer heat had broken and the desert showed hints of autumn gold in the changing scrub brush. The ceremony was small, held at the ranch rather than in town. The preacher was an old circuit rider who had seen enough of the world not to judge a man for marrying a woman with Indian blood. Thomas Crawford stood as Owen's best man, and Cookie's wife stood up for Harper, having become friends with her over shared meals and recipe exchanges. Not everyone approved. Some of the ranch hands quit, unwilling to work for a woman they viewed with suspicion. Some of the neighbors stopped doing business with the Crawford Ranch, citing vague concerns about reputation and propriety. Thomas, ever the businessman, grumbled about lost contracts and social complications. But Owen did not care. With Harper by his side, the ranch transformed. She trained him in her methods, teaching him the patience and observation that allowed her to communicate with horses in ways that went beyond human language. Together, they built a reputation for producing the finest riding horses in the Utah Territory, animals that were reliable and intelligent and bonded to their riders. The Crawford Ranch became known as a place where horses came to heal. Ranchers started bringing them problem animals, the ones scarred by abuse or broken by harsh training. Harper would take them in, no matter how damaged, and slowly teach them to trust again. Owen handled the business side, negotiating fair prices and building relationships with buyers who valued quality over cheap, broken-spirited mounts. Their first winter together was hard. Money was tight after losing several major contracts. The cabin that had seemed cozy during courtship felt cramped during the long, cold nights. They fought sometimes, tensions rising when stress ran high, but they learned each other's patterns, learned when to push and when to give space. Harper was not easy to live with. She was stubborn and independent, chafing at any hint that Owen thought she needed protection or management. She had lived too long on her own, survived too much, to gracefully accept being told what to do. But Owen was not easy either, carrying his own scars from a childhood with a bitter, violent father, prone to brooding silences and stubborn pride. But they learned. Love, they discovered, was not the easy passion of those first kisses. It was the choice to stay when things got hard. It was Owen learning to ask rather than assume, and Harper learning to share her fears instead of hiding them behind walls of fierce independence. It was small kindnesses, like Owen bringing her coffee before dawn when she went to check on a sick horse, or Harper leaving wildflowers on his desk when she knew he was stressed about the ranch finances. Spring came again, and with it new life. The mares they bred produced healthy foals that Harper handled from birth, teaching them from their first moments that humans could mean safety and kindness. And Harper discovered she was pregnant, a revelation that filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. "What if I am not good at this?" she asked Owen one night, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if I do not know how to be a mother?" "Your grandmother raised you to be an extraordinary woman," Owen said, pulling her close. "You will teach our child the same strength and compassion she taught you. And what if the child faces the same hatred I did? Half-breed, they will say, not belonging anywhere. Then we will teach them that they belong right here with us. And we will make sure they know both sides of their heritage, all the wisdom and strength that comes from your grandmother's people, and whatever scraps of good that might exist in my family line." He kissed her temple. "Our child will be loved, Harper. Whatever else the world throws at them, they will know they are loved." Their son was born in January of 1885, during a cold snap that froze the water troughs solid. Harper labored through the night while a midwife from town coached her, and Owen wore a path in the floorboards with his pacing. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and howling, Owen held him with shaking hands and felt his entire world reorganize around this tiny, helpless creature. They named him Daniel, after Harper's father, a gesture of forgiveness for a man who had abandoned his family, but had nevertheless given Harper life. Daniel Crawford had his mother's golden eyes and his father's dark hair, and from his first weeks, he responded to Harper's whistles and songs with calm attention. Motherhood changed Harper. She was fierce before. Now she was absolutely fearless. When a group of men from town came to the ranch with veiled threats about Indian babies and tainted bloodlines, she faced them down with Daniel in her arms and such cold fury in her eyes that they backed away without ever laying hands on either of them. "My son is a Crawford," she told them, her voice sharp as broken glass. "He is a citizen of this territory and this nation, same as any of you. And if any of you ever threaten him or this family again, you will discover just how much of my grandmother's spirit lives in me." Owen, arriving from the far pasture with a rifle in his hands, had never been more proud or more in love. The years rolled past in a pattern of seasons and growth. The ranch prospered as their reputation spread beyond Utah territory. Buyers came from as far as California and Colorado, willing to pay premium prices for Crawford horses. Harper trained a handful of apprentices in her methods, young men and women who were drawn to her philosophy of partnership over domination. Daniel grew into a bright, curious child who followed his mother around the corrals and learned to gentle horses before he could read. When he was 5, Harper gave birth to twin girls, Anna and Rose, who arrived during a spring thunderstorm that the family would joke about for years. The house that had held just Owen and Thomas and a handful of ranch hands now rang with the laughter and chaos of children. Thomas married eventually, a practical woman from Salt Lake City who viewed the ranch as an investment opportunity. They had their own children, and the two branches of the Crawford family learned to coexist if not always harmonize. Thomas never fully understood why Owen had married Harper, could never see past the social complications to the extraordinary woman beneath. But he respected the bottom line, and the bottom line was that Harper made the ranch profitable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Owen took Harper riding up into the Red Rock Canyons north of the ranch. They left the children with Cookie and her ever-patient wife, and they rode out at dawn with nothing but bedrolls and supplies for a night under the stars. They made camp near a spring that fed a small grove of cottonwoods, a hidden oasis in the desert. As the sun set, painting the rocks in shades of crimson and gold, they sat together watching the colors shift and change. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked, his arm around Harper's shoulders. "Staying here, tying yourself to one place when you were used to moving on?" Harper leaned into him, solid and warm and utterly certain. "Not once. You gave me something I never thought I would have, Owen. A home, a family, a place where I belong completely without question or condition." She turned to look at him, her golden eyes reflecting the sunset. "You saw me, really saw me when most of the world looked at me and saw only something to fear or pity or fetishize. That is a gift beyond measure." "You gentled me," Owen said softly, "just like you gentle the horses." "I was angry and hard when you arrived, carrying my father's bitterness even though I did not want to. You taught me patience, taught me to listen, taught me that strength does not have to be cruel." They made love under the stars that night, rediscovering each other with the passion and tenderness of long familiarity. In the morning, they rode back to the ranch and their children and the life they had built together from dust and determination and love. More years passed. Daniel grew tall and steady, taking on more responsibility around the ranch. At 18, he announced he wanted to go east for schooling, to study veterinary medicine. Harper and Owen let him go, though it hurt to see him ride away on the stage. He came back 2 years later with a degree and a wife, a sharp-minded woman from Philadelphia who took one look at the ranch operation and immediately started suggesting improvements to their bookkeeping. The twins, 17 now, worked with their mother training horses. They had inherited her gift, that strange ability to communicate beyond words, to see into a horse's heart and find the path to trust. Rose wanted to start a breeding program, carefully selecting bloodlines to produce horses with exceptional temperaments. Anna talked about opening a training facility, a place where people could come to learn Harper's methods directly. Owen, at 51, felt his body starting to slow down. His knees ached in the mornings, and he could not ride as long or as hard as he once did. But he was content in ways his younger self could never have imagined. The ranch was thriving, his children were finding their own paths, and every morning he woke up next to the woman who had transformed his life. Harper, at 46, still moved through the corrals with the same grace and confidence she had shown that first morning 20 years ago. Her hair was streaked with gray now, and lines had formed around her eyes from years of squinting into the desert sun. But to Owen, she was as beautiful as ever. More so, perhaps, because every line and every silver strand represented a year they had built together. One autumn evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the distant mountains, Harper took Owen's hand in hers. "I was thinking about something," she said. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old times, before the reservations, when her people could travel freely. She talked about the importance of passing knowledge to the next generation, of making sure the wisdom survived. You have done that," Owen said. "Look at our children, at your apprentices. Your grandmother's teachings live on through all of them." "I want to write it down." Harper's voice was firm, decided. "A book, a manual explaining the methods, not just for horses but the philosophy behind it, understanding, patience, respect. Seeing animals as partners rather than property. I want it to last beyond us, beyond our children even." Owen smiled. "Then we will make it happen. Whatever you need, we will make it happen." They spent the next 2 years working on the book. Harper would dictate in the evenings, and Owen would write it down, his careful handwriting filling page after page. They included drawings, detailed observations, stories of particular horses, and the methods used to reach them. Daniel, with his veterinary training, contributed sections on horse physiology and health. The twins added their own insights and experiences. When it was finally finished, they published it themselves, printing 200 copies that they distributed to ranches, army suppliers, and anyone else who might benefit. The book, titled Whispers and Partnership, A New Approach to Horse Training, gained a quiet but devoted following. Letters arrived from across the country, from people who tried Harper's methods and discovered they worked. Some dismissed it as foolishness, clinging to the old brutal ways, but others recognized something revolutionary in what Harper taught. A few universities even invited her to speak, unprecedented for a woman, especially one of mixed heritage. She always declined, uncomfortable with the attention, preferring to let the work speak for itself. In 1900, as a new century dawned, the Crawford Ranch celebrated its 30th anniversary. Owen and Harper stood together in the ranch yard, surrounded by 3 generations of family. Daniel and his wife had given them 4 grandchildren. The twins had married, Rose to a neighboring rancher's son, Anna to one of Harper's apprentices, and had started families of their own. The ranch that Owen had inherited from his bitter father had transformed into something neither of them could have imagined that morning when Harper walked into the corral with a wild Mustang. It was a place of learning and healing, known across the western states for the quality of its horses and the integrity of its methods. "I never seen anything like you before," Owen whispered to Harper as they watched their grandchildren play in the dust, practicing the whistles and calls their grandmother had taught them. "And I still discover new things about you every day." Harper laughed, the sound bright and young despite the years behind them. "You are sentimental in your old age, Owen Crawford. Can you blame me? I am married to a woman who can gentle wild horses with whispers. That still seems impossible, even after watching you do it for 30 years. The horses were never the impossible part. Harper turned to face him, rising on her toes to kiss his weathered cheek. "The impossible part was finding someone who loved me exactly as I am, who never once asked me to be smaller or quieter or more acceptable. That is the real magic, Owen. That is the miracle." As the sun set over the Utah desert, painting the red rocks in familiar shades of crimson and gold, Owen Crawford held his wife close and counted himself the luckiest man alive. He had started his adult life angry and directionless, following in the footsteps of a father he neither liked nor respected. But then, A woman with golden eyes and impossible skills had walked into his life, and everything changed. They had built something lasting together. Not just a successful ranch or a new approach to horse training, but a family, a legacy, a way of moving through the world with compassion and respect. Their children and grandchildren would carry that forward, spreading Harper's grandmother's wisdom to generations yet unborn. The wild horses would always have someone who spoke their language, who saw them as partners rather than property. And in that small corner of the Utah desert, two people who might never have met, who came from worlds that were supposed to stay separate, had created something beautiful together. That night, lying in bed with Harper's head on his shoulder, Owen listened to her breathing slow into sleep. Outside, the desert stretched away in all directions, vast and ancient and utterly indifferent to human concerns. But here, in this room, in this house, on this ranch they had built together, love had won. Against prejudice, against social pressure, against all the forces that said they should not be together, they had chosen each other and they had endured. "I love you," Owen whispered into the darkness, knowing she was already asleep but needing to say it anyway. In the morning they would wake and start another day. There would be horses to train, grandchildren to spoil, 1,000 small tasks that made up the rhythm of ranch life. But for now, in this moment, everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. Owen closed his eyes and drifted into sleep, dreaming of a woman who could gentle wild horses with whispers, and of all the impossible, miraculous things that love could build in the empty spaces of the desert. The Crawford Ranch continued for generations, always keeping Harper's methods at its core. The book she and Owen wrote was reprinted many times over the years, becoming a classic text in humane horse training. Their great-grandchildren would speak of them with reverence, telling stories of the woman who changed how the West treated its horses, and the man who loved her enough to help her change the world. And somewhere in all of it, in the legacy they left behind, Harper's grandmother's spirit lived on. The old ways, the wisdom that said animals deserved respect and understanding, survived because one woman refused to let them die, and one man refused to let her face that battle alone. Their graves eventually stood side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, simple markers that bore their names and the dates that bracketed their lives. But the real monument was everywhere around them, in every horse trained with patience instead of pain, in every person who chose partnership over domination, in every generation that learned to listen to what the voiceless were trying to say. Owen had been right that first morning, watching Harper gentle the wild stallion. He had never seen anything like her before. But more importantly, he had recognized what he was seeing, had understood its value and its beauty. And together, they had built something that outlasted them both, a testament to what becomes possible when love opens doors that fear and prejudice try to keep closed. The end came for Owen in his 73rd year, quick and merciful, a heart that simply stopped in his sleep. Harper followed him 3 years later, having lived long enough to see her book go into its 5th printing, long enough to hold her first great-great-grandchild, long enough to know with absolute certainty that the work she had started would continue. On the day of her funeral, every corral on the Crawford Ranch held horses she had personally trained, or that had been trained by her methods. As her casket was carried to the grave beside Owen's, those horses raised their heads and called out, a chorus of whinnies and neighs that sounded almost like singing. The family stood weeping, but also smiling, because if anything proved the truth of Harper's belief that horses understood more than humans gave them credit for, it was that spontaneous farewell. Daniel, now the patriarch of the Crawford family at 68, stood at the graveside and spoke of his mother. "She taught us to listen," he said, his voice rough with grief but steady with conviction. "Not just to horses, but to everything and everyone around us. She taught us that the old ways, the ways that honored all living things, were not primitive or foolish. They were sophisticated and profound. And she taught us that love, real love, means seeing someone completely and choosing to stand with them against whatever the world throws your way." He looked at the assembled crowd, at family and friends and strangers who had come from across the country, because Harper Zimmerman Crawford had touched their lives in some way. "My father used to say he had never seen anything like her before. None of us had. None of us will again. But we carry her forward in how we live, in how we treat the animals in our care, in how we love each other. That is the gift she gave us. That is how we honor her memory." As the sun set that evening, painting the Utah desert in the colors Owen and Harper had watched together for so many years, the Crawford family gathered at the ranch house. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled every room, their voices creating a symphony of life and continuity. Stories were told, memories shared, tears shed and laughter offered up like prayers. And out in the corrals, the horses settled in for the night, gentled by methods passed down from a Paiute grandmother to her granddaughter, to generations of people who learned to whisper instead of shout, to partner instead of dominate, to love instead of fear. The wild horses of the West had found their voice, and it sounded like Harper Zimmerman Crawford, whispering in the desert wind, reminding everyone who would listen that all living things deserved respect, understanding, and the chance to be seen for exactly what they were: beautiful, powerful, and utterly worthy of love.